that a joke?
Trust me, Tony, this is no laughing matter, but regardless, welcome back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, to another very interesting and extremely important Marvel's Avengers related video. So even though we recently received some very interesting information and footage regarding the newest member of the Avengers project with that of Kamala Khan as Miss Marvel, we did actually get some very important information regarding the game's campaign. Now, as we know already, Marvel's Avengers is going to be a title which players can immerse themselves in for years to come, with added content being featured within the game at a regular basis. But even with all of this content, like heroes and regions being added into the game after its main release on May 15th, 2020, the developers did state that there is going to be a definitive campaign which gamers can experience along the Avengers story. Not to mention that the Warzone missions that the Avengers project will feature are said to be co-op missions which will enhance the narrative that you are currently experiencing. And while we are going to receive a deep dive as to how the co-op is going to operate for the game in early 2020, we did actually receive some details today as to how long the game actually is going to be. And from a recent article from comicbook.com, they go on and state fans can't wait to get their hands on Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix's Marvel's Avengers. And once they do, they'll find plenty of content to keep them busy thanks to a full campaign and an ever-growing series of multiplayer missions. Comicbook.com had the chance to speak with Crystal Dynamics senior brand director Rich Briggs about how the game will be for players diving in. And while it will vary depending on your choices, we did get a ballpark idea of how much time you'll be spending in the Avengers world before more content is released. And it's a format Tomb Raider fans will recognize. I think it'll depend on exactly how deep you want to go into it, Briggs said. So if you think about previous Crystal games, you know that if you want to be playing your way through the core story, it's going to be in that area, 10 to 12 hours. But if you want to see everything there is and do all the side missions and everything else, you're generally looking at 30 plus hours in the Tomb Raider games, Briggs said. So we're not putting exact numbers on it just yet, but you can expect something comparable to what we've done in the past with that regard. And then, of course, you have the extended narrative and the extended game plan with more heroes post-launch. So based on what Rich Briggs said during the interview, it seems like we'll have at least around 30 hours total of content to actually play through if we want to get the most out of the entire experience. But if we analyze Rich's statements a bit further, that 30-hour timestamp is basically concluding with everything that will be featured within the Avengers project, including the main hero mission campaign, as well as the explorable hub worlds, co-op, side missions, and of course, grinding for gear. But if we look at the standard single-player campaign that the Avengers project is going to feature by itself, it's generally going to range around 10 to 12 hours. Now, as for the Tomb Raider games themselves, I'm mainly going to be comparing them to the Avengers project with the first Tomb Raider game in 2013 and the sequel to that game with Rise of the Tomb Raider. The main reason why I'm not going to be bringing up the Shadow of the Tomb Raider game is because that it was Eidos Montreal who mainly developed that game instead of Crystal Dynamics. And if you do manage to go on the website of howtobeat.com, it does indicate that the main story of the first Tomb Raider game alone is around 11.5 hours, whereas for the main story of the sequel for that Tomb Raider game of Rise of the Tomb Raider was approximately around 13.5 hours directly. But of course, if you're a completionist like myself who does love doing all the side content and collectible searching within all these games, it does relate to 20.5 hours for the first Tomb Raider game, as well as a total of 34 hours for Rise of the Tomb Raider. However, the main comparison I know the majority of us want to dive into is how long the campaign of Spider-Man PS4 is compared to that of what we know about Marvel's Avengers. And to take a quote from the community director of Insomniac Games himself with James Stevenson, he did state all the way back in 2018 before the game release is that the average playtester took around 20 hours on default difficulty to beat Marvel's Spider-Man. But then some of the other playtesters spent a lot longer if they did do a ton of the side activities that were featured within the game. And based on how much time I've actually been able to play the game myself, I can guarantee that the main campaign alone for Spider-Man PS4 is directly over 20 hours long. And alongside of that, we also had the wonderful addition of the City That Never Sleeps DLC, which did add 3 individual chapters expanding upon the game's narrative after the main story was finished once it released. And if we look at all of the DLC at face value, it did add a total of over 10 hours worth worth of content with brand new story missions, side activities, and suits to unlock if you did play through the entirety of those chapters. Which means that if we look at the base game of Spider-Man PS4 back in September of 2018, as well as all 3 of the City That Never Sleeps chapters, which fully finished releasing after December of 2018, that adds up to a total amount of all the main missions as well as side content and collectibles to find within the game, adding a total of over 30 hours of content for Marvel's Spider-Man. But on the side of the same coin, if we only look at the direct story campaign's length for Marvel's Spider-Man with the addition of the DLC, considering how each chapter did have at least 1 hour worth of extra story content alone, that does mean that the final main story length with the addition of the DLC for Spider-Man PS4 was around a total of 24 hours. And of course, we can't forget the biggest benefit of Spider-Man PS4 itself is the fact that it is a fully open world game with incredible amounts of areas to explore within Marvel's New York. So knowing all of the main story content that was featured for Spider-Man PS4, and with the benefit of it being an open world game to fully explore with Marvel's New York and a plethora of side missions and collectibles to dive into, it made it a very long, lengthy, and enjoyable game. But this, however, is where we start to dive into a bit of a concern regarding Marvel's Avengers. Once again, like the developers have stated previously, the main campaign that Marvel's Avengers is going to feature will mainly consist of these hero missions that you can look into within the hub worlds to explore. And even though this time length does line up almost perfectly to what the previous Tomb Raider games had, I was honestly expecting a much longer campaign, considering that we are dealing with some of the most popular characters in comic book history. But specifically, given the fact that this game is going to feature some live service and games as a service type of elements, as well as a fully co-op feature, I do understand why they would have to possibly shorten on the single player compared to everything else. Although, because of those aspects about the game and the fact that they are really trying to encourage players to grind for the best sets of gear, it makes me a bit worried whether or not that we are actually going to receive a fully finished product once it does release in May of next year. It makes me wonder if they're actually going to release an unreleased game because they're not fully finished polishing the other characters that are going to be added down the line just yet. Plus, even though the game is going to have a very extensive co-op feature, some people may just be buying the game in order to play a fully single-player experience and nothing else. And considering that we've only seen a small glimpse of the game's story with that of A-Day, as well as the recent inclusion of Miss Marvel, I'm just really hoping that the game's main campaign can actually get the job done in an impactful and emotional way with the amount of time that we have with it. And while the main campaign for Marvel's Avengers isn't short by any means, I just hope that it is actually a well-rounded story that can be told in a fully single-player manner. But if it turns out the most important parts of this game's story are going to be hidden until the content releases down the line for years to come, then I'm going to be a bit agitated with what this game is. But in the end, we just have to wait and see as to how everything turns out and just flat out hope for the best. But until that time comes, everyone, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about the Marvel's Avengers campaign length being around 10 to 12 hours just for the single player alone, and do you think it will have a lot of content for you to dive into once the full game releases on May 15th, 2020? I'm very much interested as to what the side missions in this game are going to be, considering what Rich did state during the article, but I just hope that the single player missions do offer a lot of variety and emotional impact when we play through it ourselves. And until that time comes, everyone, thank you all so much for watching, stay merry Marvelites, and peace out.